And David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his military attire, and put a bronze helmet on his head, and outfitted him with armor. And David strapped on his sword over his military attire, and struggled at walking, for he had not trained with the armor. So David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, because I have not trained with them." And David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag, which he had, that is, in his shepherd's pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. Then the Philistine came and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he was contemptuous of him, for he was only a youth, and reddish, with a handsome appearance. So the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild animals." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a saber, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you and remove your head from you. Then I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that this entire assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will hand you over to us." Then it happened, when the Philistine came closer to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag, took from it a stone, and slung it, and struck the Philistine in his forehead. And the stone penetrated his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with his sling and his stone. He struck the Philistine and killed him, and there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath, and finished him, cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Then the men of Israel and Judah rose up and shouted, and they pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the Philistine dead lay among the way to Shaaraim, even to Gath and Ekron. Then the sons of Israel returned from their close pursuit of the Philistines, and plundered their camps. And David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. Now when Saul had seen David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" And when Abner said, "By your life, O king, I do not know." And the king said, "You then ask whose son the youth is." So when David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. Then Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" Then David answered, "I am son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite."